Greetings all and welcome to the RightShip GHG Rating Webinar. Before we begin, let me explain how to participate in today's session. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please press the Help button, which is a yellow box with the question mark on the bottom right of your screen. This will provide assistance for any common issues. We also sent you a troubleshooting guide with your reminder email, which may provide some assistance. We welcome your questions during today's event. In order to submit your questions, simply type them into the question window on the left of your screen and then hit the blue Submit button. We will be answering as many questions as possible during the Q&A session that follows the main presentation. Please feel free to send in your questions at any time though, and they'll be added to the queue. If at any time you are having any difficulties with the audio or advancing of the slides, try hitting the F5 key to refresh the webinar presentation. Please also be aware that today's session will be recorded and will be available on the RightShip YouTube channel from tomorrow. You'll be notified by email when the archive is available. My name is Hannah Gibney. I'm the Marketing Communications Coordinator at RightShip. I'm going to be helping out with the Q&A today, but in the meantime I'm pleased to introduce our presenters. If you'd like to take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Hannah. Chris Funberger, Sustainability Manager at RightShip. We've also got Sarah with me.
Hi everyone, I'm the Senior Sustainability Officer here at RightShip.
So welcome everyone. Today we're talking through RightShip and our greenhouse gas rating. So some of you may be familiar with the rating, others not so. So our presentation today is basically to give you a general overview of the rating and then talk through how the rating works and also how it's being applied in industry. So whether you're a customer or not, please feel free to send some questions in at the end for the Q&A. Otherwise, please contact us offline for more detailed information. So first up, just wanted to introduce RightShip. So who are we? We're an independent company formed in 2001. We started from a small office here in Melbourne in Australia, and we've now expanded worldwide. We've got offices, our head office here in Melbourne. We've also got an office in Houston in America and an office in London in the UK. So we're a 24-hour-a-day operation with 300 customers worldwide. So we specialise in ship vetting, risk management and sustainability of vessels around the world. Areas that we focus on are the petroleum and dry cargo services, and we're the largest provider of third-party vetting services around the globe. So what is vetting? Basically it's a review or screening of a vessel for how safe it is and also how efficient it is. So for example, charterers use it to reduce the risk of their cargo being moved from point A to point B. Last year we vetted approximately 3.4 billion tonnes or deadweight tonnes through our system. So a lot of goods moving from A to B. So in terms of the agenda we plan to cover today, firstly we'll touch on high level what's happening around the world with the Paris Agreement and also the International Maritime Organisation's strategy for decarbonising the shipping industry. And we'll talk about RightShip's GHG rating. What is it? How the market's using it and what kind of uptake we're seeing in the market. And we'll also provide some specific examples or case studies of it being used out in the market. We'll talk through next steps, for example, how you can contact us and work with RightShip in the industry, and also have a Q&A session at the end. So if you've got any questions, please put them in and we can answer them at the end of this session. So now I'll hand over to Sarah to start give you an insight about what's happening out in the industry.
Thanks, Chris. As you may or may not know, shipping moves about 80 to 90% of the world's cargo, so it's crucial for world trade. Shipping was left out of the Paris Agreement, you might remember, back in December 2015. However, as you can see on the slide here, it is predicted that shipping will increase by around 50 to 250% by 2050. Hence, we have seen an unprecedented amount of interest and pressure on the shipping industry to reduce its impact on the environment. The good news is that industry has taken this into its own hands. at the International Maritime Organisation's Marine Environment Protection Committee's 72nd meeting in April this year. Sorry, that was a bit of a mouthful. Industry agreed to focus on meeting carbon targets. So this was obviously really exciting for industry to have a clearly defined strategy and target to work towards. One of the key takeaways from the initial strategy was the agreement to reduce shipping emissions by 50% by 2050 based on 2008 levels. Whilst there is some uncertainty on how to achieve this, many areas of industry have been working towards carbon reductions. At RightShip, we've been working with industry since 2010 to reduce carbon emissions in the shipping industry. We developed the greenhouse gas rating tool to give industry more insight into shipping efficiency, and in the next section we'll go into more detail about that. Our answer to the need to lower carbon emissions and make sustainable and efficient choices easy is RightShip's greenhouse gas rating. So on the screen here you can see 5 bulk carriers. Some of them might be out on the horizon there. They basically all look the same, right? Wrong. When you dig down into the detail, you can find that not all ships are the same. Each ship is built differently, with different hull designs, different engines, different design speeds, and different fuel economies. Therefore, we end up with more efficient ships, say like the Prius of the sea, and less efficient ships, say like a Hummer. So how do you tell which is the Prius and which is the Hummer? I'll hand over to Chris next to explain exactly how we can help you quickly and simply make an informed choice around this.
Thanks, Sarah. Now we'll dive into the detail of RightShip's GHG rating. So industry several years ago defined efficiency with the Energy Efficiency Design Index, or EEDI for short. Basically what it is a measure of the amount of grams of CO2 or carbon dioxide per tonne per nautical mile. So put simply, how much carbon does a ship emit to move a cargo from point A to point B? So the EEDI Design Index was applied to all new ships built after 1 January 2013. It's a one-size-fits-all approach, as you can see there with the reference line. So if I explain the graph on the right-hand side, you've got the amount of carbon on the y-axis, so the amount of carbon that a ship emits, and as you can see, the smaller ships emit more carbon per tonne nautical mile, and the larger ships generally emit less. And on the x-axis, you've got the dead weight, or the size of the ship, which you can see it going from small ships right up to very large and ultra-large crude carriers. I mentioned the black line is the reference line, so all new ships had to fit below that reference line, and then each blue dot you can see there represents one ship. So this gives you a comparison of each ship against each other and how efficient they are. But the problem that RightShip saw was this is applying to all new ships, whereas existing ships out there, which is roughly about 40 to 45,000 existing ships out on the oceans, they weren't covered by this regulation. So what we thought was, let's apply this to the existing ships as well and provide that like-for-like basis, or put all ships on an equal playing field. And one of the main reasons why we wanted to do this was today, 2018, there's only nearly 5,000 ships covered by the EEDI regulation, and as I mentioned, roughly 40,000 not covered by that regulation. And it's predicted out to 2020 there'll be only about 15% of the world's fleet covered. So RightShip filled that void and provided an industry benchmark so we can compare new ships to existing ships. So how did we do this? So imitation is the greatest form of flattery, and that's what RightShip did. We took IMO's benchmark, the EEDI, the Energy Efficiency Design Index, and applied it retrospectively to all vessels to calculate their amount of CO2 per tonne nautical mile. And we called this the EEDI, or the Existing Vessel Design Index. And this gives a direct comparison between the regulated ships with EDI and the ships built prior to the regulation, or existing ships. We then broke it down into subsets to enable a peer group comparison on a like-for-like basis. So for example, up here we have an orange rectangle which outlines the ships that this tanker that you can see there is compared to. So basically it's ships plus or minus the deadweight size. So the deadweight on the screen there is 109,999 deadweight tonnes, and we compare those tankers down to about 100,000 tonnes up to about 120,000 tonnes. So for example, when a charterer or a ship owner or bank goes into the market to assess how efficient a ship is, they know that we're comparing those like-for-like ships. So tankers versus tankers, or if you're into bulk carriers, you'll compare bulk carriers of the same size and type, same for container ships, general cargo ships, and the list goes on. So the next slide outlines the comparison method and how we've taken this complex information and turned it into an easy to interpret scale. And I'll hand over to my colleague Sarah to run through that.
So what Chris just ran through can get pretty complicated. So what we did was simplify the maze, so to speak, and we took inspiration from the EU's energy efficiency labelling scheme. So A represents the most efficient ships, with G representing the least efficient. And then in the middle there we've got D ships, which represent the average. So whilst the calculation behind it can get complex, we've put it in simple terms. A ship's greenhouse gas rating is how well or how poorly a ship compares to the average ship. So to give you an example, we have up on screen here the African Rook. So this vessel called into the port of Melbourne, where we're situated, last week and is currently heading for New Zealand. It's an open hatch cargo ship, 37,000 deadweight tonnes and just over 3 years old. When compared to ships of a similar size and type, the African Rook is D-rated, or put simply, it is of average efficiency based on the amount of carbon emitted per tonne nautical mile. So now I'll pass back to Chris, who will run through the greenhouse gas rating in practice.
Thanks, Sarah. Now I'll touch on how industry is leading the sustainability charge. So we've got charterers using the GHG rating as a vessel selection tool, allowing them to choose a more efficient ship and a more environmentally sustainable ship. So in 2012, our first customers started using the GHG rating, and you can see with the white highlight there on screen, we've got Cargill, Huntsman and Unipec UK were the first 3 customers to use it. As of today, in 2018, it's now used for a vessel selection tool for 1 in every 5 vessels chartered. This equates to about 2.4 billion tonnes of cargo moved annually, or 30,000 vessel movements per year. It's obviously a large impact in the charter market. We also have ship owners using it to promote their more efficient ships, financial and insurance institutions using it to make more sustainable selection practices, and also terminals and ports using it out in the market. One of the main benefits of the GHG rating is that it provides that transparency to the market and to the industry of how efficient a ship is compared to its peers. So I'll now discuss in more detail how the charterers are using the rating to select more efficient ships. So I've got an example of a case study here. It's a large Australian mining company called BHP. Late last year, in late 2017, they employed a stricter environmental policy. So that being removing F&G rated ships from their supply chain. So F&G being the least efficient ships, they made a blanket rule across all ship types and sizes to remove them out of their supply chain in order to remove the amount of carbon in their supply chain, or carbon dioxide emitted through their shipping supply chain. So this has really impacted the market, and in particular the Capesize fleet. The Capesize ships are large bulk carriers that transport goods such as iron ore, and BHP move a lot of iron ore, say for example from Port Hedland in Australia up to China. And this has really impacted some ship owners who have or had F-rated ships. So what we've seen is a record amount of interest with ship owners contacting RightShip about energy efficiency measures and how they can improve their GHG rating. An example up on screen there is that TYNDALL Maritime Services. So in October last year, they looked to do a detailed investigation across all their bulk carriers, roughly about 50 ships that they own and operate, and they look to see how they can improve their GHG rating on all of these vessels. So in a short time, we're already seeing results of improvement, and this is basically them improving the GHG or providing measures on their ships to improve the GHG rating. And this is making their ships more attractive to charterers like BHP and the other 54 charterers out there who have policies around F and G rated ships. And the example you can see up on screen here is a large bulk carrier, TYNDALL Dawn, and this ship basically improved from F rated or inefficient to D rated, which is an average efficiency. That's a really good example of how charterers making decisions to reduce their carbon dioxide in their supply chain is really impacting the market, and we're seeing that knock-on effect of ship owners changing their practices and how their fleet operates to improve their GHG rating. So now I want to talk through a case study on the actual CAPESIZE fleet and what we've seen change over the last few years. So mentioned earlier, CAPESIZE is basically a very large bulk carrier that can carry products like iron ore and coal and so forth. And over the last few years, we've really seen a change in the dynamics of what the CAPESIZE fleet looks like. So overall, generally a ship lasts for 25 years or so. So you think an average ship or an average age ship would be about 12, 13 years old. Well, the CAPESIZE fleet's really changed in its dynamics and really turned this theory on its head. So if you look here, we've got on the x-axis there, you've got year of build for each ship. On the y-axis, number of ships, and then also you have the different colour codes. So you've got A, B, C rated, D rated ships, which are average and so forth. So you can see there that during sort of from 2009 to 2013, we saw a huge amount of ships being built. So this was off the back of the market boom back before the global financial crisis. And then more recently, in sort of 2015, 16, 17, you can see a lot of the ships being built around that time are the most efficient ships, so A and B rated ships. But one of the more interesting points is an average age of a ship now has gone from, say for example, 12 or 13 years old. In the Cape fleet, it's now more like 6 years old. So this is a very different fact, and something that ship owners are slowly coming to terms with, that when they ring up and talk about their GHG rating of their ship that's 6 years old, which historically has been relatively new, it's now middle-aged. And say a ship that's 12 years old is probably what I'd term old age for a ship. And this is off the back of those record number of new builds, but also the huge amount of ships scrapped in the last few years. So I've seen between 80 and 100 ships scrapped over the last couple of years, and going out beyond that, you see up to 70, 80 ships scrapped. And this has really changed how the market dynamics look. And in terms of the GHG rating, I mentioned most of the A and B rated ships have been built in the last 2 or 3 years. But also something that is a little bit different in this market or segment is the up to 60% of the E and F rated ships, so the most inefficient ships, were built between 2010 and 2012. And there's various reasons for that, but one of the main reasons we think is because the market was, several years before that, the market rates were going up so dramatically. We think that ship owners were jumping into the market, basically grabbing any ship they could find and not considering as much the energy efficiency of ships. Whereas, as I mentioned, in the last 2 or 3 years, with bunker prices changing a lot, we've seen that push back towards more efficient ships. So now I'll hand over to colleague Sarah for a run through on another case study about the GHG rating.
Thanks, Chris. We mentioned earlier that we have 55 charterers that have F and G policies in place, So a big question you might have now is, does it actually save CO2? An independent study was undertaken by the TYNDALL Centre for Climate Change Research, who were co-authors of the IMO's third greenhouse gas study back in 2014. So in 2013, the TYNDALL Centre analysed 500 instances where analysed 500 instances where charterers removed less efficient ships from their supply chain in favour of more efficient ships. From the study, there are, I guess, two key takeaways that we'd like to point out here. One is that on average, there was a 5 to 9% reduction in CO2 emissions for chartered vessels. And two is that there was also a good correlation between the design and actual speed. So the results are great and give us confidence in our chartering customers' environmental policies, and that they're making a difference in terms of reducing CO2 emissions. Up on screen here, we have one example from Cargill, where an F-rated vessel was substituted for a C-rated vessel, and this translated into 11.2% saving of carbon dioxide emitted, which is the same or the equivalent fuel saving of 900 tonnes of CO2. So we just talked through an example of charterers looking to reward efficiency in the market. So we'll now look at an example of ship owners who go above and beyond by investing in efficiency. One good example is ODFJELL'S, who set about improving the fuel efficiency of their Canava class vessels in close cooperation with a few partners. RightShip were also consulted early in the project to understand the requirements for verification and also the potential improvements in the greenhouse gas rating that it might have. The upgrades included new energy efficient propeller blades, rudder bulb and technical upgrades of the main engine, turbochargers, as well as shaft generators. The combined upgrades reduced fuel consumption and emissions by over 20%, which was an outstanding outcome for the project. The bow clipper is now amongst the most efficient chemical tankers in the world for its size in terms of energy efficiency, that is, and is A-rated for greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, ODFJELL'S was so excited, they decided to paint the A and G rating scale on the accommodation block of their vessel to show that they were in fact A-rated. Chris, did you want to now talk about the port aspect?
Thanks, Sarah. So Sarah's outlined how charterers are looking to reward those in the market, and also ship owners, how they're changing how their ships operate to make sure they're more attractive to charterers. Now I'll outline how different ports around the world are also rewarding efficient ships. So we've got up on the screen there Port of Vancouver with their Eco Action program. For those who haven't heard about it before, for more efficient ships, you can receive a discount on your harbour due rates by participating in their program. It's one of the most popular port programs out there, and you can see there that RightShip, our GHG ratings, a really popular choice. So with the Port of Vancouver Eco Action program, you can receive up to 47% off your port dues, which is quite a significant benefit for those investing in efficiency. And that's why RightShip like working in this space, is because it really rewards those ship owners that go above and beyond. And that example Sarah just outlined with that ODFJELL'S tanker, they've really gone above and beyond and invested in efficiency. So we really like working in this space because ports can't generally choose who calls at their port, but they can choose who to reward. That's a quick snapshot on how ports are rewarding more efficient ships and the charterers that use them. Another aspect that we look to impact supply chains and make them more sustainable is a way to measure and manage your carbon emissions out of your shipping supply chain. So we've basically taken our GHG rating one step further, and we offer a product called the Carbon Accounting Tool, which measures our or a shipper's or a charterer's Scope 3 emissions. And then they can look to either manage, reduce and potentially offset some of those emissions. So how do we do this? Well, we look at the whole life cycle of the vessel. So when it moves from its cargo from A to B, that's the vessel's tank to propeller, or tank to wheels, some people might know it as. But also we take that full life cycle of actually extracting the fuel out of the ground and then refining it and getting it to where the vessel fuels. So this is known as basically the voyage emissions of carbon dioxide, or the overall well to propeller emissions. This is a relatively new product for RightShip, and it's something we've seen some strong uptake from various charterers out there, and probably the leaders at the moment are BHP, who we've mentioned a few times, and also Insightec Pivot Limited. So they're an Australian-based fertiliser company, and they've really led the way in understanding their supply chain emissions. And also recently they announced that they offset their 2016 and 2017 shipping emissions. So that was about 150,000 tonnes of CO2, which is quite a substantial amount of carbon.
So to wrap up, the greenhouse gas rating is easy to understand and allows users to easily assess the relative efficiency of a vessel of all sizes and types. The greenhouse gas rating also encourages and rewards ships to go above and beyond. It also provides a robust method to measure ships' efficiency and reduce supply chain emissions. And the greenhouse gas rating is also being used more and more by charterers, ship owners and ports who are rewarding more efficient ships. So given the current developments that we've seen recently in the climate change space, including the IMO's first set target to reduce shipping emissions, there really is no better time to reward efficiency.
Great, thanks for that, Sarah, and thanks, Chris. Now that concludes the formal presentation for today. Before we launch into the Q&A session, a reminder that this was intended to be a generic introductory seminar. If you have any specific questions related to your fleet, please contact us offline. And you can also contact us if you'd like to see the spread of your GHG rating for your fleet. A copy of this webinar will be forwarded to you in the coming days. It'll also be available on YouTube, on our RightShip YouTube channel, if you'd like to share it with your networks. There will also be an email coming which will ask you for some feedback on the webinar. We'd really appreciate your response. It'll take less than a minute or two of your time, and it really helps us to understand what's worked well or not so well, and so to improve our future sessions. So we'll now launch into our Q&A session. So if you could please continue to ask questions through the prompt on your screen. We have received a few, so we'll get stuck into those. But if you have any questions that do require a private response, please by all means email our environment team offline. Okay, so time's come for us to get stuck into our Q&A session. So if you could please continue to send your questions through the prompt on the screen. Now, the first question that's come through is, if a ship owner wants to upgrade their ship's GHG rating from an F rating to, say, a D or an E rating, what is the process they undertake? Chris, do you want to take that one for us?
Sure, thanks, Hannah. This is a really good question. We've had this really popular question at the moment, especially with some of the charterers deciding to not take F and G rated vessels, for example. So how do you actually undertake this? So firstly, we always suggest speak to class and technology providers about different options to upgrade energy efficiency, and I see there's actually a few technology providers on the webinar today. So at the same time, I'd also, obviously talking to RightShip about what the options are. So taking this into account with the GHG rating, I think we mentioned earlier an example for ODFJELL'S where they went through a major retrofit and upgrade of their vessel. So it can depending on what the ship owner needs and requires and like to see. But basically, once they've consulted and understood what the improvements would be, RightShip are happy to give a bit of an assessment of what the GHG rating will improve to, and then they can go away and determine whether it's the right solution for them. And basically, post-works, RightShip, so for example, in the ODFJELL case, we were provided with documentation that outlined what had been undertaken, so the works, and what the improvement in efficiency is. So that's a really important step, is being able to verify the upgrades and the improvement in efficiency. And so ODFJELL is one example, but there's many more that are out there, and happy to talk through with ship owners, managers, also work with class and any technology providers we can out there to assist them and really work with RightShip to get the best outcome for the ship owner.
Great, thank you, Chris. I might pass this next one over to Sarah. So Sarah, if the RightShip rating is focused on design, what about operational efficiency?
Sure, thanks, Hannah. So when we're looking at design versus operational, I guess the first thing to mention would be that doing it on a design base helps to level the playing field and really compare ships on that like-for-like basis. So basically, by comparing the design of a ship, we can look at certain factors that are consistent across the ship. So when I say that, I'm talking about a set of defined parameters. So we look at the speed of the engine at 75%, engine performance parameters, fuel consumption, things like that. And it's the same basically when we're looking at it. So it helps us get that like-for-like. Whereas if we're talking about operational data, it gets quite difficult, I would say, because we're also having to deal with some external factors like wind, waves, current, the type of cargo carried, the charter speed, and those kinds of things make it difficult to get that like-for-like comparison and a level playing field. So really, by comparing ships on the design basis via the greenhouse gas rating, we can give charterers, banks, ship owners, and ports an assessment of the relative efficiency of each ship, and through the rating, through the A to G scale, it makes it easy to interpret for everyone as well. So I think that's probably the main differences that I'd like to mention for those. Thanks,
Great, thanks, Sarah. I've got another one for Chris, I think. So if a vessel has a rating of, for example, D, how often is the rating for this particular vessel updated?
Yeah, I think this is a really good follow-on from the previous question about the design. So the GHG rating's focused on the design of the vessel, so we compare ships on that like-for-like basis. And as Sarah mentioned, it's all about that level playing field. So basically, a ship owner or manager will update their vessel once, and that basically gives them the rating. So, for example, if they've got a new ship with an EEDI certificate, they'll update that today, and that'll keep their rating. So they're compared basically each day with every ship in that size and type. So if you've got, we mentioned earlier that 110,000 tonne tanker, that'll be compared on a daily basis against other ships. So as new ships come in, generally they're more efficient, and older ships get scrapped. That ship will move down the ratings over its life. So it starts at A-rated ship. Sort of as it's middle age, it should be D-rated, and as it's old, about to head to the scrapping yards, it'll most likely be F or G rated. So that's generally how it works. But newer's not always more efficient, but that's generally how it is. The other little piece on that is, as you mentioned about some of those retrofits earlier, so if you're going through some energy efficiency upgrades and you have some major updates or conversions of your ship, that'll be another time where a vessel's sort of re-verified, I suppose. So if you can prove that you've had for example, a 5% improvement in efficiency because of some of the works you'll do, we'll then re-evaluate that vessel at that time.
Great. Thanks, Chris. I think we'll send this one to you again, if that's all right. So we see some GHG ratings are verified. How robust are the GHG ratings that aren't verified?
Yep. So common question, and very much, we've got 76,000 ships overall in our database. roughly about 45,000 in-service vessels. We don't have the exact specifications for each one, but what we did was we built the model using EDI guidelines and also a lot of the work that IMO's done in the past, like IMO circulars and so forth. So in terms of the greenhouse gas study from the second greenhouse gas study and third one, we've used a lot of the assumptions that are based in there. So say, for example, specific fuel consumption. So in terms of how robust they are, in 2015 we had DMVGL, who are a class society, actually review our GHG rating. So they looked at a number of things. It basically took them 12 months to go over the rating, and they recreated it. But some of the key points they looked at was how robust was the data and so forth going into the rating. So that was one of their main outcomes, was that overall the rating worked as intended, but there was an incentive for a ship owner to verify their GHG rating. So on average, they found that there was a 3 to 5% improvement as those figures went from assumed numbers to actual data from the ship. So overall, a ship will most likely move between half to 1 GHG rating up. So it'll go, for example, from a D rated or an average vessel up to a C rated once verified, or it may even stay on that D rating. So in terms of how robust they are, they're very close when the assumed numbers are in there. Generally, you get a slight improvement when you actually put the actual figures from the ship on there.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So we've got another one coming through. So would you like to take this one, Chris?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So you mentioned the example of Anagel Maritime Services. Can you please advise on which specific measures or upgrades they used in order to upgrade their GHG rating?
Yep, no worries, Hannah. So big question at the moment. As we mentioned, a lot of the charterers are whether it's Cargill or BHP or many of the others in our list of 55 charterers, they're really trying to reduce the carbon dioxide in their supply chain. So really pushing shippers to become more efficient, and I think that aligns really well with the IMO strategy that's underway at the IMO. So what specific measures did they have? So it's not only Anagel, but mentioned Oddfell, and there's others like TMS Dry and so forth that are doing a lot of work. If we take the Oddfell, for example, there was a lot of upgrades to their propulsion system and turbocharging and I suppose fine-tuning or tweaking the engine. That was a fairly major thing. In terms of Anagel, they have basically looked at a review of their whole fleet to see what options they have available and what they can do, and in terms of improving the sort of propulsion systems and also the hydrodynamics of each of their ships. So they've started in the dry bulk sector. That exact ship we were talking about, they basically performed a process where they limited the output of the engine, and that basically gave them that improvement. So when a surveyor went on board and performed that process, they then provided that information to us, and we reevaluated the performance of that engine. So that's the basic process that they went through with that particular ship, but there's many other ways. There's no one size fits all for any ship. That's just one option that's out there. So yeah, happy to have those discussions with anyone out there, whether it's a technology provider or a ship owner. Yep, and then I think the last question we have there is about the ports that use the rating. So at the moment, the main mentioned Port of Vancouver. There's also north of Vancouver, there's a port called Port of Prince Rupert, who are a very strong advocate of the sustainable shipping as well. So have a really good relationship with them as well. So they've been using our rating since 2014 to incentivise more ships. So that's on the coast of Canada there. On the other side, we're currently in discussions with Port of Quebec as well, and we've had a couple of other ports show a lot of interest in Canada as well. And then Seattle and Tacoma have also in the past work with us to benchmark vessel calls and those kind of things. And we're really looking to expand our reach in the port space. So definitely trying to talk to other ports, and we've just sort of had a renewed campaign on trying to get them on board. But at the moment, Vancouver and Prince Rupert are the main ports that offer incentives.
Great, thanks, Chris. Now, there's just one more that's come through, and it's about our carbon accounting tool. I know how much you love talking about that, Chris, so I might send this one to you. So you mentioned your carbon accounting tool. What would the benefit to my company be to get involved in this?
Yep, it's a really good push at the moment. We're getting a lot of interest from our chartering customers, and also some ship owners. We've had a couple of inquiries about ship owners looking to, I suppose, set themselves apart from their other people that are out there trying to hire out their ships. So that's a really interesting approach, and be very keen to talk to any other ship owners who are keen to try to set themselves apart. But if you're talking from a charterer's perspective, agree historically, Scope 3 emissions or ship source emissions have been someone else's problem. What we're seeing in the market is a distinct shift to, well, no, that's actually your product on the ship, that's now your problem. So we're hearing this from some of our chartering customers, that they are now being taken to task about what their emissions are, not only under their control, but also other people's vehicles, whether it's ships or rail or whatever that is that they move their products on. So what are the benefits? So firstly, if we take Untitled Pivot and BHP, so they're really good examples from our end. So Untitled Pivot's an Australian fertiliser company. So they've been working with us for a number of years on their F&G rating, so they don't take those inefficient ships. So they've seen a reduction in the amount of carbon in their supply chain, and that's a really good step to take, is to manage your supply chain through better ship selection. And more recently, we had that example of them actually looking to offset their 2016 and 2017 emissions, and it equaled about 150,000 tonnes of CO2 over the 2 years, and massive achievement and a really strong leadership position out in the market. And what they're seeing is basically that benefit with their customers, setting themselves apart from their competitors, and that's one of the main drivers, and also that ability to understand what their emissions are and then manage them and take that further, and that's what that carbon offsetting piece was. And really strong leadership, and really exciting to see them out in the market, and really proud as a company to be able to work with them to provide that opportunity.
Great, thank you for that, Chris. Yep. And it looks like another couple of questions have come through since talking about our carbon accounting tool. So, Chris, I'll send this one to you as well. So, how did you go calibrating the CO2 calculator, and is there anybody that's certifying this?
Yeah, so definitely. So that was one of our biggest recommendations when we set out on this journey, was to basically get some independent validation. So we use a standard that's based out of Europe, so EN 16258. It's all to do with calculating emissions from transport services. So we use that as the basis to actually base all the calculations on. But that's the standard we use. But then we also went a step further and got an independent consultant here in Australia called Pangolin Associates, and they basically spent time comparing and validating our process and going through the carbon accounting process to make sure it's robust and works as we intend it to. And they basically take annual audits of our process and go from there. So that's the main process we go through, and the validation of it.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yep, and this will make this our final question, because we did promise a short session and we're going a little bit over. But so will the carbon accounting measurement affect other vessels except for CAPESIZE bulk?
Yeah, so I think what they're trying to say here, so Spiros is trying to ask us, will the measurements, so I'm assuming you mean the like charterers with their F&G rule, will it work outside of the bulk fleet? And So I'd say that the bulk fleet's been the spike in activity recently because of BHP changing their practices, but historically we've got shippers like Cargill and Huntsman and so forth since 2012 changing the market. But I suppose we haven't, because the Cape fleet is so small and unique in how many operators there are and owners. I think that's why I've seen as such a, and BHP obviously charter a lot of those vessels, a large percentage. So I've seen a massive flurry of activity recently in that area. But if we take Cargill as an example, we've seen since 2012, I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but they charter many thousands of vessels each year, and sometimes the owners aren't actually aware of the fact that their ship might be F&G rated, and they probably don't work as closely with the charterer like BHP do. So, and it's impacted a lot of, in BHP's case, impacted a lot of the sort of longer term charters, not so many spot charters. So we've seen a really large impact over time. You know, we've got 55 charterers, not only in the dry bulk sector, there's roughly about half in the wet or petroleum sector. So yeah, we see many millions of deadweight per year, even per month, that get impacted, and the ships very much change in terms of the ones that are getting chartered, and we're always trying to work with our customers to reward those most efficient ones. And I think it's not only in the wet or petroleum sector, but also the dry bulk, and we're seeing some really large changes in the market. And like Spiros points out, at the moment the Cape fleet's a hive of activity, but in the past we've seen many other sectors seen a lot of work in that space. So it's all about rewarding those people that invest in efficiency in their ships.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Now I think we'll leave it there for tonight. Thanks everyone for your involvement in the webinar and for sending the questions through for the Q&A. Any questions that we didn't get to, we'll follow up with you offline. Thanks Chris and Sarah for your time, and thanks all for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks guys.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.